for this moment. I've been waiting for this moment for Norm Finkelstein to actually have a discussion about Israel and Gaza with Piers Morgan, because I feel like Piers has interviewed multiple people about this topic, but he has not interviewed someone like Norm, who is very well versed with this particular issue, has been to Gaza, is very familiar with what is happening over there, and he also is Jewish as well. Norm Finkelstein has talked about the fact that his parents were Holocaust survivors as well. So this is a little bit of a different situation. So I was actually surprised when Piers Morgan did accept this push from some of his audience members to interview Norm Finkelstein about this issue. So I want to go ahead and jump into this discussion here. If you have not seen this, this is very good. I was waiting to get back from break to cover this. Definitely check this out. I wish this interview was longer. It's 27 minutes. I'm not sure why, but I do wish it was longer here. As you can see, Norm is already heated. Let's jump into it.
Based on what happened that day, we know the attacks began at 6:30 in the morning. We know that at 11:18 a.m., Israel confirmed, as you say, 40 dead, 700 injured. At 11:35, Benjamin Netanyahu said, "We are at war." At 12:30 that day, at lunchtime, I tweeted horrifying and appalling scenes from Israel. This murderous, indiscriminate Hamas terror attack on Israeli people is shameful and indefensible. By 4:17, Israel said 100 were dead at least, 985 wounded. Civilian hostages have been taken. At 4 o'clock, a little later than that, around the same time, footage is released of the attack reporting that 3,000 bombs and firearms have been fired off by Hamas. Civilians have been killed, and so on. And yet at 6:30, and then again at 9:16, you were retweeting your initial Substack, and you then added at 9:16 that you felt the hostage situation was crocodile tears. So I would take issue with your statement that you thought it was only after 2 or 3 days that anyone had a clue about the scale of what had happened here. It was very obvious during that Saturday about the mounting scale of horror. And I just don't understand why someone as scholarly as you, as expert in this region, in this conflict as you are, why your response would be that for several days, one of glorifying in the in what you called heroic resistance, whereas mine, and I've always tried to be fair-minded about this conflict and reported it for CNN and tried to be fair and accurate as and when I've seen it.
No, you haven't been fair. I'm sorry, but he hasn't been fair and accurate. He has not.
At midday that day, I'm talking about a murderous, indiscriminate terror attack and horrifying and appalling scenes. I just don't believe that you weren't aware, with great respect, about the scale of what was going on.
Okay, Piers, let me begin by saying I want to have a civil conversation, and I'm going to do my darndest to remain faithful to the facts and faithful to truth. I'll do my darndest not to exaggerate. The first thing I have to say is I don't tweet. I've never been on Twitter. I have 3 young tech people who I send statements to, and then they make the decision where to place it on Substack, on Twitter, and so forth. Okay.
So he's referring to, just to give you a little bit of backstory, Piers Morgan is referring to the statement that Norm Finkelstein made. This was after, like when Hamas said, like they broke through the gate and that kind of stuff. He's referring to that particular statement, which Norm Finkelstein did, say that, oh, I didn't realize the numbers were what they said they were. But this is just Piers trying to do a gotcha on Norm Finkelstein, so he doesn't have to focus on the real issues of what's happening to the Palestinian people, which they get to later.
Just want to clear that up. I made one statement on the first day on the basis of the information that was available to me. The information was 50 people had been killed. Now, my memory is, but I won't claim my memory is infallible. The numbers didn't start to grow until the next day.
That's not true.
As the numbers, okay.
It's just not true.
Piers.
Well, Professor, with respect.
Okay, I'm not going to.
It's not true.
Piers. Yeah, but you have to listen to what I say.
But you want me to believe you when you say you weren't aware of the scale of this for several
Piers,
days. I find that just, I'm incredulous that you want me to believe that.
Okay, Piers, I'm not going to force you to believe it, and I'm not going to even try to impose my will. I'm simply saying, as a factual matter, speaking for myself, I was not aware that the numbers had been beyond 50 when I made that statement. I will further state that to my knowledge, I could be mistaken, that I did not make another statement until the numbers start to grow. And I admit, I have said to you, it was a moral quandary for me. And I said in many interviews that it was for me a very burdened moment because I wasn't entirely confident in my moral judgment. And it was at that point that I started to look back at what the white abolitionists had to say when Nat Turner carried out a slave rebellion and many whites were hacked to death, children were beheaded, and I wanted to see, because I was not confident of my moral judgment, I wanted to see what did the white abolitionists, those who fought against slavery, had to say. And I looked at what William Lloyd Garrison, probably the most famous of the white abolitionists, and he said, horrible things happened during Nat Turner's rebellion, but if you read his statement, he wouldn't condemn Nat Turner or Nat Turner's
All right, well, let me ask you.
Confederates.
Okay, so let me ask you. Let me ask you. Okay, listen, I've heard you say this before, that analogy. That's fine. But let me ask you, given you now know the scale of what happened, given you know 1,200 people were killed, including 800 or so completely innocent civilians. We know that children were killed, that grandmothers were killed, and their deaths FaceTime to their families. We know that over 200 people were kidnapped and taken.
It's interesting when he describes what happens on October 7th, because he makes these statements by saying that children were killed, women were killed, grandparents were killed, etc. But he says this as though this has never happened to the Palestinian people. You know, he says this is not the first time that Israel has bombed Gaza. This is not the first time. So we've seen this happening for years. This is not the first time. Look, by the way, Hamas is not in the West Bank. So what's the excuse for them harming people in the West Bank? They're not in Lebanon. They're not in Syria. What's the excuse for them harming people in Lebanon and Syria? Come on, guys. Are we really going to fall for this again? Are we really going to fall for the propaganda? Like when our government told us that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, only to come to find out there were no weapons of mass destruction. We can't keep falling for this. But notice he won't mention that. That's important.
Hostage. Given you know the full scale of this attack, I've asked a lot of guests these two questions, and I'll be curious about your answer. One, would you categorize it as a terror attack? And secondly, would you condemn Hamas for what they did?
My view is as follows. Number one, as far as the evidence shows now, atrocities occurred on October 7th. The magnitude of the atrocities and the types of atrocities, for example, were children beheaded, were women raped. That remains, so far as I can tell from the evidence, an open question. However, that there were atrocities that occurred, my answer is yes. Number two, that's a factual question. Then there's
the question was it a
question.
terror attack?
Yeah. Well, atrocities, it seems to me, denotes a terror attack.
Okay, thank you.
That's what atrocities are.
Thank you.
Okay. So, number two, that's the factual question. And then there is the legal question. As a matter of law, it seems unquestionable that the people who perpetrated these atrocities would be prosecuted and convicted in a court of law. However, I would say on the legal question, I should think that there would be some mercy shown because those who carried out the atrocities were concentration camp inmates. Number three, which I think is the one that concerns you the most, is the moral question. And at a moral level, my view is, my basic precept, we may disagree, my basic precept is that there but for the grace of God go I. That is to say, I'm very reluctant to condemn people who are in a position or in a condition such that were I in that position or condition, I'm not sure what I would do. Now, the 1,500 young men who burst the gates of Gaza, they were born into a concentration camp.
That piece right there, I think, is so... Most of us don't know what this is like, right? Like, I wasn't born in a concentration camp. Like, most of us don't know what this is like. But think about what he just said. They were born imprisoned. They were born imprisoned. Imagine if you couldn't leave your town. I don't know where all you guys live, but imagine if you couldn't leave your town. You were born and you're a kid and you're like, Mommy, can we go to Disney World? Can we go to such and such? Can we go to... No, we can't leave the gates. We can't leave this town. Imagine that. I want you to try to put yourself in their shoes. And now pretend you're a parent and try to explain to your kid why you guys can't leave these gates. Why you're fenced in like some caged animal. So imagine what it must feel like to be born imprisoned. And your only crime is just the fact that you were Palestinian.
They lived for 2 decades in a concentration camp. They had no past, they had no present, they had no future, they had no jobs. Half of them, according to humanitarian organizations, suffered from what's called severe food insecurity. And then on top of that, as I'm sure you know, Piers, because you keep up with the news, periodically Israel goes into Gaza and it mows the lawn. And you know what mows the lawn means. It means...
And where's that outrage from people like Piers Morgan when Israel does that? Where's that outrage from people, like the other commentators on mainstream media? Where's that outrage from them when the state of Israel goes into Gaza and does that, when they mow the lawn? No outrage. You don't even hear about it. They pretend like it's not even happening. Again, they have continued to dehumanize the Palestinian people. When you dehumanize people, you make them feel as though they don't have value. And you convince others that they don't have value. And when you convince other people that these people you're dehumanizing don't have any value, you're also convincing those people who don't know any better that their lives don't matter. That it doesn't matter if they're killed. It doesn't matter if Palestinian women and children are killed. You're convincing those people that it does not matter, that it's a necessary task that needs to happen, because you've already convinced people that they're not worth anything. And this has happened to other groups, not just them, obviously. It's happened to African Americans in this country.
Means a high-tech massacre in Gaza. In 2008-9, Operation Cast Lead. 2012, Operation Pillar of Defense. 2014, Operation Protective Edge. And in each of these high-tech massacres, visited the people of Gaza, in some cases hundreds, in some cases thousands of Palestinians are killed.
Okay, and let me ask you.
In fact, just in
let me ask you on that point.
In light of,
and I want to finish.
See, this is where he's going to interrupt We're going to come back, okay? We're going to come back here. But I want to show you something because someone sent this to me the other day. And I want to show you why Piers Morgan has the talking points that he has. Because again, I think it's important that we follow the money. So watch this or not watch this, but I want you to see this. This is very quick. You got to ask where the money's coming from. This is from Loki. Loki's also really good on this issue. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with him. He's also a rapper, but he's an activist. Piers Morgan presents a strongly pro-Israel slant on Rupert Murdoch's Talk TV. So that is what this is. Talk TV that is owned by Rupert Murdoch. Let's continue. Murdoch has funded the Jerusalem Foundation, which builds inside illegal Israeli settlements. I'm going to repeat this again. Murdoch has funded the Jerusalem Foundation, which builds inside illegal Israeli settlements. Murdoch was also a board member of Genie Energy, which has deals in the Israeli occupied Golan Heights. This is why you have to follow the money, people. Now you understand why Piers Morgan has the talking points that he has. Thank you, Loki, for pointing that out. It's all about the money. Once you start following that, then you see why people have the views that they have and they have the talking points that they have. Now let's get back to this discussion here. Again, this is Talk TV owned by Rupert Murdoch.
One question about that. In that period, and by the way, I've been condemnatory of some of the things you've just talked about publicly. I've tweeted my condemnation of some of these things. And I've tried to shine a light on the plight of the Palestinians for many, many years. And I feel that the oppression of the Palestinian people for many decades has been absolutely outrageous. So on that, we can completely agree. But when it comes to what you're saying here,
and that's about as much that he can say on this particular platform on Talk TV and still be able to keep that job.
It seems to me what you're trying to paint is a picture of some kind of moral justification for what Hamas did. And that's where you lose me, because I don't see why there could be anyone who can see the scale of what Hamas did on October the 7th and not simply condemn it out of hand. You may also want to condemn some of the response by Israel. That's completely normal. I would say that there are serious question marks about the proportionality of what they've been doing. But if you can't start from a basic humanity position of saying what happened on October the 7th was a disgusting terror attack worthy of condemnation, then for me, I find it very hard to then respect anyone's demand for people to condemn Israel and their response.
Piers, I'm trying to be candid with you. Number one, I appreciate your humanity. I do. I don't know you from Adam. I'm not a TV or a television or a social media kind of person. I'm a book person. I'm old-fashioned. However, I do recall that when that famous moment when Susan Boyle appeared on Britain's Got Talent, and I remember the camera turning to you, focusing on you. I could see it in my mind's eye. I saw your eyes narrow, and suddenly the humanity in you came up. Here is this obscure woman whose talent had gone unrecognized. And if I can speak to that same program, for me, the most poignant moment, the one I carry with me since that moment, was when Simon Cowell asked Susan Boyle, well, why haven't you been discovered yet? And she replied, because I haven't been given a chance. And that's how I feel about the people of Gaza. That's how I feel about those young men in Gaza.
They haven't been given a chance. Very important to know.
You ask me why I won't condemn them. Because those young men were born into a concentration camp. They were born into among the most dense populated places on God's earth. Half of the population of Gaza is children. 70% are refugees who were expelled from Israel in 1948 and their descendants. 70% of Gaza's youth have no jobs, no future, no nothing. They are Susan Boyle times 10,000.
And when you rob people of when you rob people of the tools that they need to succeed and thrive, what do you expect the people to do? You rob them of a decent education. You rob them of jobs, like you said, being unemployed. You rob them of any type of dignity that they can have. What do you think the people are going to do? You got to remember, while people are struggling and suffering in Gaza, Israel has all the resources and things that they need. College is free. Healthcare is free. Everybody has it. Everybody has it. The U.S. government will give them $8.3 billion a year to make sure that everybody in their country can have these necessities. But they won't even do it for you in America. Wake up, folks. Wake up. This is why I say, don't you let them make you feel bad. Don't you let them make you feel guilty about not supporting Joe Biden. Don't let them come at you with that. They do nothing for you. They help out other people in other countries before they even look at you twice.
Never given a chance. And as things looked the night before October 7th, when the question of Gaza was disappearing from the public stage, I will admit to you, Piers, I myself had given up on Gaza. In 2020, I decided it's hopeless, it's pointless. I only have a finite number of years left in my life, and it's time for me to move on. And I'll tell you, that was a wrenching decision on my part, because I knew I was abandoning the people who for 15 years I had devoted my life to chronicling every detail of the horror that had been inflicted on those people. And I gave up on them.
Okay.
And that meant if I gave up, they had no future, because I was the last chronicler.
Okay, but what I would say,
Gaza.
All right, but what I
have the only
right,
book
but Professor,
that's been written on the subject.
Let me respond. I would respond by saying that what people in Israel would say, and what Jewish people would say, particularly who live in Israel, is that they were facing a constant barrage of rockets from Hamas. That Hamas won political power in 2005-06. That they were given a huge amount of money. And could have done whatever they wanted with that money, but chose to pursue a path of effectively terrorizing the Israelis over that period. And the Israelis, you're right, they responded they have a far superior military, and they responded in the way that they did. And this cycle has been going on in repeat and repeat and repeat. But where you and I...
Let's pause here about the amount of money that was given to them. Guys, I want you to think about something. These people were driven into basically a ghetto. Okay? So you can't rip people from their land and their home and fence them in, throw some money at them and say, do something with that, when you are not permitting these people to even be able to return to the land they came from. When you're still occupying the people, what good is all this money going to do that you're giving them if you're still fencing me in, okay? You're still fencing me in. Think about it, people. There was a song called Don't Fence Me In. So don't fence me in. What does that matter? What does it matter? They give you all this money and say, build something, develop this area, this ghetto that we pushed you into, but you can't leave. You're a prisoner. You're trapped.
I differ about this is that I think what happened on October the 7th was just on a different scale to anything we've seen and the way it was carried out. And I just don't think saying that people who have been oppressed, which they undoubtedly were for many years, that justifies them committing that act of terror. But let's take a break. Let's come back after the break and discuss this more. Okay,
so they go on break and then they come back.
Completely oblivious to the reality of what had happened here and the scale of it. But given you're not now oblivious to that, why have you not removed that Substack, given the language is so clearly offensive to people, and you based it, by your own words, on a false premise about what had happened?
See how he's trying to focus on the article that was written by Norm Finkelstein, which they already touched on at the very beginning of the show. See how he's trying to do a gotcha moment with Norm Finkelstein. Here's the thing. I say if you've written something and you're incorrect about it, you don't delete it, right? Because what happens is then if you delete it, then people are like, oh, they deleted that article. It's guilty. No, but you can write another article if you want to correct yourself or whatever, but he shouldn't have to delete his work, right? So Piers is trying to bring the conversation back to this article, the Substack article that Norm Finkelstein wrote about October 7th, and he's trying to keep you there. He's trying to keep the audience right there so that you're not paying attention to the other issues that Norm is bringing up about the oppression.
You know, Piers, that's a very good question. And this morning, when I was talking to some friends from the UK, I was warned you would ask that question. I'll honestly tell you, I never fear the truth. I don't. I feel the truth is a very powerful weapon on the side of the oppressed. I never fear it. Now I'm going to give you the answer. Again, you can or can't disagree with me or believe me. I was tempted to remove it. I was tempted to quote unquote protect myself. I didn't remove it because I thought that's intellectually dishonest. I wrote that statement. It's part of the historical record. It's part of the documentary record. And I shouldn't do what Stalin used to do. So when he published photographs of the Bolshevik Revolution, he would take Trotsky's picture out.
Okay, but
and that's the image.
So you won't delete
it.
So
that's the image that stuck to me.
All right, you haven't got to delete it, but do you regret it?
Do I regret what?
Do you regret the contents of that Substack, given that you now know what really happened?
Yes, if it can be misconstrued to mean that I wrote that with full knowledge of what happened, of course I regret it.
Okay.
However, it remains part of the record. And as a serious scholar, I'm not a great scholar. I'm not in the ranks of the great British historians, but I take scholarship seriously. I did not want to denature, to falsify, to misrepresent the documentary record.
But let me ask you, Professor. All right, let me ask you.
And I will leave it there.
Okay, that's fair. Listen, that's your decision. You are the son of two people who survived the Holocaust, who were both in concentration camps. You're a Jewish man, and you know how incendiary that Substack has proven to be with Jewish people around the world, many of whom have felt this is the nearest thing to the Holocaust of World War II that they've endured. What your parents went through, being revisited on them in these kibbutzes on October the 7th.
Here comes the guilt. Now he's trying to guilt trip him.
What do you feel about them? I mean, how would your parents have felt about you literally on the day that this happened, talking about heroic resistance, talking about that you will never begrudge the scenes, the stars in heaven are looking kindly down, glory, glory, the souls of Gaza go marching on. How would your parents have felt about that, coming out of concentration camps, surviving the Holocaust of World War II?
Well, first of all, anything I write, I have my parents looking at the screen behind me over my shoulders, in a metaphorical sense. I am very conscious every moment of my existence. Every moment of my existence goes back to the martyrdom of my family. So it's not as if suddenly you're posing a question to me that never occurred to me. Quite the contrary, I do need, even 30 years after their death, I need the moral validation that came from my parents' martyrdom and the extermination of their family. How would my parents have reacted? My guess is if on the first day they heard that inmates in a concentration camp burst its gates, I think my parents would be very pleased at that fact. As the events became clearer, my guess, but this is pure speculation, my guess is my parents would go out with their hearts, would go out to those who burst the gates of the concentration camp and whose lives were destroyed. Now, you will say to me, completely legitimately, you would say, well, what would your parents feel about the innocents who were slaughtered in the atrocities on that date? So I'm going to give you as close an answer as I could give, as I'm able to.
So I don't think that Piers Morgan was expecting to hear that response from Norm, because I think that I feel like he tried to guilt trip him here, not being aware of what was coming.
I once asked my late mother, I said to her, what was your feeling when you heard that the German cities were being terror bombed during World War II? The carpet bombing of the German cities targeting civilians. What was your feeling? And my mother's response to me was, quote, our feeling was, if we're going to die, we're going to take some of them with us. Now, that's not the most morally elevated statement. I agree. And do I wish my mother had and my father had a heightened sensitivity to German civilian life? I suppose I would wish it. But I will tell you, Piers, to the last day of my parents' life, it was unthinkable that they would have a kind word to say about Germans. And it was unthinkable that I would ever quarrel with them on that point.
Okay.
I accepted that given their life experience, they had the right to hate the people who destroyed their lives.
Okay.
And the people
Professor
of
Finkelstein.
Gaza have the right to hate the people who destroyed their lives.
Woo! I don't think Piers Morgan expected that to come around the block. And I just want to end this segment with this here. This tweet here from Danny Haifong, 8 years. It took 8 years for Israel to release this Palestinian mother back to her family. There are thousands like her. This isn't a war among equals. Israel is a terrorist state. And you can see her coming home here. So yeah, it's It's something else. But again, I think at the end of the day, what you guys have to remember, and I hope I explained this with every story, is that again, if you look at where the funding is coming from, a lot of this makes sense. You'll understand why people are responding the way that they do, why they have the laws the way that they have them, and why even someone like Elon Musk is going to go over there to talk to Netanyahu. If you look at where the money's coming from, you understand why Piers Morgan has the talking points that he has on Talk TV. So we always have to take it back to that.